He had not moved since the sun rose. His body was cold. It lay near the edge of the clearing. Face turned to the sky. Flies circled him. His mouth was open, as if he had tried to call out. But no sound had come. You've just opened your eyes to 0.5 million years ago. The world smells of ash, bark, and wet earth. Your feet are bare. The wind cuts through animal hide. The forest hums around you, but something feels wrong. Someone from your group is not breathing anymore. No one has ever seen this before. No one knows what to say. What to do, where the soul goes, if it goes anywhere at all. You feel something in your chest you don't have words for, something heavy. And this is where it all began. The very first moment a human stood in front of death and chose not to look away. If you want to know what life was really like back then, raw, silent, terrifying, this is their story, and now it's yours too. Subscribe if you want to return to the time when everything we are was still being born. The others stood a few steps away, some with stones in their hands, some with nothing at all. None of them spoke. They had seen injury before. They had seen bleeding and bone. They had seen animals die. But this was not the same. He had no wound. He had not cried out. He had just stopped. His chest no longer moved. His skin no longer held warmth. The wind passed over him, and he did not stir. One man stepped forward. He had no title. No one had told him to move. But something in him did. He knelt beside the body. He looked at the face that was once full of breath, now empty and still. He pressed the eyes closed, not because he knew what to do, but because they seemed too wide to open to roam then. He stood and went to the shelter. He brought back an old hide, one that had dried in the sun months ago. He laid it over the body from the head to the feet. The others still did not speak. They only watched. By the next day, the smell began. The flies were thicker. The body could not stay near the sleeping ground. The same man looked to the trees. He walked until he found soft soil near the roots. He picked up a sharp stone and began to dig. The ground was dry in some places, wet in others. It took time. It hurt his hands, but he kept going. When the hole was ready, he went back and waved to the others. They followed. They lifted the body. It was heavy, not just from weight, but from stillness. They placed it in the hole. No one said anything. The man picked up a round stone and placed it at the head, then another near the feet. He stepped back. A woman came forward and placed a broken tool near the chest. Someone else left a bundle of roots. Another dropped a few red berries. No one asked why. They just did it. He covered the body with soil, one handful at a time. The hide stayed in place. Soon the body was gone beneath the earth. Only a small mound remained. They stood around it for a while. Not long. No one cried out loud, but the silence felt heavy. They left one by one. Some looked back. Most didn't, but the man who buried him stayed. He sat nearby, hands on his knees, eyes on the mound. He did not know what it meant. He only knew it felt better than leaving the body for the birds. That night he could not sleep. He saw the dead man's face again and again, the empty stare, the still mouth. In the morning he returned to the grave. He placed a carved stick beside the mound. No one asked what it was. No one touched it. When the next death came, a child, the people looked to him. He stepped forward. Again, he wrapped the small body in hide. He dug the ground. He placed stones. And the others followed. They brought gifts again, a feather, a small bone, a dry flower, things that held no use but felt needed. More seasons passed, another died, then another each time. The man stepped forward, not as a leader, not as a priest, just someone who stayed when others stepped back. It became a rhythm, not spoken, not taught, but remembered. Dig, cover, sit, place something, then walk away. Children began to ask why. He had no answer. He only said it helped. Helped who? They asked. He shrugged. Sometimes he sat by the graves long after the others left. Sometimes he touched the stones they had placed. He felt the earth with his palm, sometimes cold, sometimes warm, sometimes still, sometimes alive with wind and insects. He grew older, his hands stiff, his knees weak, but he kept digging. When he could no longer lift the bodies, others helped, but they always waited for him to begin. When the woman who once left berries died, he tied a string of dried seeds and placed it beside her. A child laid down her old toy stone, the others joined. They did not talk about gods. They did not call it a ritual, but they knew something had changed. One evening the man did not wake. His breath had stopped. His hands rested on his chest, his face calm, and this time the people knew what to do. They wrapped him gently. They chose a place near the others. They dug. They laid him down. They placed the stones. One young boy carved a stick and set it beside the head. No one cried with noise, but the air felt full. They stayed longer this time until the wind grew cold. Then they left, one by one, just as he had done. They did not say his name, but they repeated his way, and each time they buried someone. They remembered the man who first stepped forward and stayed when no one else knew what to do. That is how it began, not with belief, not with magic, but with care and time, and quiet hands in the dirt. The wind carried the dust down the narrow path between trees that had stood since before memory, and though the forest moved like it always had, something had changed inside the people who walked it. It had been many seasons since the man who first buried the dead was placed beneath the earth, but his actions had not faded. They had grown. They had taken root like vines around stone. Now, when someone died, the people did not wait in confusion. They gathered without being told. They brought furs, smooth stones, dried flowers, sharpened sticks. They brought the things they had seen others place before, even if they did not understand why. The one who had begun it all had no name left, but his way had become memory, and that memory had turned into pattern. Children were shown the places where the dead were laid. They were told not to touch the stones. They were told to speak softly there. Even the wild dogs moved slow around the graves, as if they knew those grounds were not the same as the rest. In time, there came one who noticed more than others. She watched how people walked when they approached the graves. She noticed what they chose to leave behind, not just food or fur, but objects that meant something: a father's stone blade, a mother's fire stick, a brother's bone flute. She began to ask questions. She did not ask what happens after death. She asked why we give things to the ones who cannot take them. No one had an answer, but many nodded as if they felt the same question inside. One night she stayed behind after a burial. She placed her palm on the dirt. She whispered words, not clear ones, just sounds, but they were her own and they felt right. From that night on she did the same after every burial, and slowly others joined. First they whispered with her, and they began to hum low sounds drawn from the chest, rising into the trees. It was not song, not yet, but it was more than silence. Over the moons it grew. Some began to mark their faces with red dust before the burials. Some painted stones and laid them at the heads of the dead. The objects they left grew more personal: a child's hair string, a cracked water shell, a carved tooth. They began to speak to the dead, not with full words, but with sounds and touches. They believed the dead could hear, or if not hear, then feel, or if not feel, then remember. The graves began to form rows, lines where no one stepped without thought, and when lightning struck a tree too close, they moved the burials farther away, not from fear, but respect. Stories began to form, soft ones, spoken near fires. A man saw his father in a dream, standing at the edge of the trees, watching with eyes that still held light. A child claimed she heard her sister's breath in the wind. These stories did not frighten them. They became comfort. They became the roots of belief. The woman who had begun the whispering came to be seen differently. People brought her gifts, berries, feathers, stones with rare shapes. She kept none of them, but she listened to the grieving, she sat with them, she pressed their hands to the earth. She began to know when someone would die, not from magic, but from the way their breath slowed, the way their eyes turned inward, and when they passed, she already knew where the grave should be. She taught others the rhythms, how deep to dig, how to fold the arms, how to wrap the hide so the wind would not pull it. She taught them to wait after the last breath, to not rush to hold the body for a time, to let the silence fall before moving. They did not call her a leader, but when she spoke, they listened. When she walked toward the body, they followed. As her own time neared, she dug her own grave. Not fully, but enough to mark it. She placed a stone beside it, flat and wide. With a mark carved by her own hand, she told the others not to be afraid. She told them to whisper like she had done, not because it would wake her, but because it had always felt right. When she died, the tribe gathered in silence. They painted their faces red, they hummed, they whispered, they laid her body in the earth she had touched so many times. Then they did something new. They formed a circle around her grave. They placed their hands on the shoulders of the ones beside them. They stood like that as the sky darkened, and when the first star appeared, they let go. This became part of the ritual. Each time someone died, they stood in that same circle, their hands on shoulders, their breaths shared in stillness. They began to see death not as something broken, but as something passed from one to another. The rituals grew. A fire was lit before each burial now. Some said it helped guide the spirit. Others said it kept the animals away. None agreed, but none questioned it either. The items placed with the dead were now chosen with care. They began carving wooden shapes to tell stories, simple lines, a hunt, a river, a fire, a face. These were placed beside the dead as if to remind them of the life they left. They began to return to the graves in the moons that followed. They brought food and left it near the stones. They sang now, not just hummed, simple songs with few words. Names, places, memories. They believed the dead still walked in some way, not with feet, but through dreams, wind, fire, and feeling. The rituals no longer belonged to one person, they belonged to the whole tribe. But always, they remembered the ones who had begun it. The man who first covered a body with hide, the woman who placed her hand on the earth and whispered. The rituals did not stop death, but they changed how it lived in the hearts of the people, and that changed everything.